and welcome. It's wonderful to have all of you here with us on this Peace Week at the Carter School at George Mason University. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Andy Shalal. I'm the CEO and founder of Busboys and Poets. And, you know, this program is really near and dear to my heart because it's about art and activism. As an artist, I understand the power of art and the power of the language that art speaks to create social change. In fact, I don't believe you can have social change without art and culture. We created Busboys and Poets with the idea of bringing art, politics, and culture together to collide. And that collision is what really creates the social change that we all hope to see in the world. So I'm thrilled to be part of this program. We have some great panelists with us, and I wanted to introduce my co-moderator, Audrey Williams. It's great to have you with me here once again. This is like it's not a Zoom reunion, it's a StreamYard reunion. So it's great to have you.
It's good to see you, Andy. And
thank you.
Yes, I'm Audrey Williams. I'm with the John Mitchell Jr. Program for History, Justice, and Race at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's just because we got a lot of good stuff going on there. And we've done a lot of really fantastic events in the past with Busboys and Poets. You know, we are so thankful to be able to partner again for this fantastic event. The event, as you saw on the opening slide, is part of Carter School Peace Week. This is a new tradition at the school where every semester we're bringing together people from the broader field of peace and conflict resolution to talk about peace, justice, resilience, social change, basically the most pressing issues that we are always thinking about in terms of how can we make the world a more equitable and just place. And to do that, we bring together people for a bunch of events throughout the week. So this is our fourth day. We have about 20 events throughout the week. We still have 3 more events tomorrow. So please definitely make sure you check that out, including another event that we will be hosting at that point with our JMJP director, Dr. Charles Chavis Jr., and Andy will be hosting a keynote with Heather McGhee, who is the New York Times bestselling author of The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together, as well as Dr. Gail Christopher, who is a lifelong social change agent and an executive director of the National Collaborative for Health Equity. So you won't want to miss that. Definitely check out the Carter School's website, carterschool.gmu.edu, to find more information about that. We have a fantastic group of speakers today. Before we introduce our speakers, I do want to make sure to do a land acknowledgement. We are in a virtual space, but we are all, coming into this call, coming into this event from across the United States, from across the world. And it is important to recognize the history and the present of the land from which we're calling in from. Myself and the speakers on this call, we are calling in from the lands of the Anahuac people, the Piscataway people, the Nacotchtank and Anacostan people, as well as from unceded Tongva, Kizh, and Chumash lands. It's important to recognize that these lands have been stewarded by indigenous nations for millennia, and that indigenous peoples, nations, and tribes across the United States and North America continue in their stewardship of these lands. You'll see on the banner if you want to find out what land you currently reside on, and understand who that land belongs to, which indigenous peoples, tribes, nations that belongs to, the history, but also the current present as well, that these relationships are ongoing. And, the really important thing to recognize, remember, and to actively work to remedy is that indigenous peoples, nations, and tribes have been and continue to be targeted by a system of white supremacy and settler colonialism. And yet within such campaigns of violence, indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations continue to be stewards for the land and in relationship to these lands through their linguistic, cultural, spiritual, sociological, artistic, and ecological knowledges and practices. So a land acknowledgement is not merely to acknowledge, it's to help us reflect on relationships to land and learn more, which I certainly need to be doing a lot more of. I know. I also want to take this moment to recognize that today is the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Chattel slavery and the systemized dehumanization of African people are among the original sins of the United States. The legacy of slavery reverberates constantly into our present and impacts, all of us, but continues to impact, in terms of white supremacy, the systemic anti-Black racism that we will likely be talking about today. The purpose of this event is to attempt to create a space to honor all of the different people who were and continue to be circumscribed by white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and settler colonialism, and to engage with how art can create space for survival, for reckoning, for remembrance, and for joy. So I do want to make a quick note that the JMJP, art and social change we see them as intricately tied, as intrinsic to one another. And for that reason, we have created an online magazine called Freedom's Plow, which takes its name from the Langston Hughes poem. So you can check out the past issues of Freedom's Plow at freedomsplow.org. And you'll see one of our speakers today, Ajinay Roundtree. You'll see some of her haikus there as well. So definitely check that out. But without further ado, I do want to introduce our fantastic speakers. The way we'll be doing this event today, we want to create, even in the virtual space, a sense of kind of being in community with each other, being in living room conversation, and also being in a place where we can kind of go back and forth between art and conversation. So what we'll be doing is we have 3 speakers here today: Christy Jones, Sabra Williams, and Ajinay Roundtree. We'll start with Christy, who will be reciting Audre Lorde's poem, A Litany for Survival. Christy Jones is ABD, which means all but dissertation. For those who might not know, she is a PhD candidate and scholar and multilingual expert on gender and race equity and human security, peacekeeping, and peace building. Here, she's doing her PhD at the Carter School, but is doing a lot of fantastic work. In January 2021, she was selected as the executive director of the International Association of Women Judges, a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that brings together judges from all levels of the judiciary worldwide. She is a candidate here at the Carter School, and her research and teaching focuses on gendered and racialized dehumanization and violence, peace building in marginalized and other communities, and the role of minoritized civil society groups in peacemaking. Christy Jones was raised in the Caribbean, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Western Europe, and is trilingual, speaking English, Spanish, and French. And she earned her Master of Science degree in Peace Operations Policy from George Mason University, and is an alumna of Bennett College, the all-women's historically Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. Our second speaker will be Sabra Williams. Sabra has received international acclaim for her work as an actor, host, and co-founder of the Actors Gaining Prison Project, including being named by President Obama as a champion of change in 2016 and being honored with a British Empire Medal for services to the arts and prison reform by Queen Elizabeth in 2018. Sabra is the co-founder of Creative Acts, a social justice initiative that uses the arts as a tool for transformation. Creative Acts has civic engagement programs in juvenile facilities and a new virtual reality arts reentry program in adult maximum security prisons for people returning after life sentences. Sabra is also a visiting lecturer at UCLA and an adjunct professor at USC. She is a Bellagio Rockefeller resident fellow and an in-demand speaker on justice and arts issues. We are so excited to have her join us here today. And she is a member of the Independent Shakespeare Company Los Angeles Ensemble. Our final speaker will be Ajinay Roundtree. Ajinay is the program coordinator at the John Mitchell Jr. Program for History, Justice, and Race, and she is also a doctoral scholar and student at George Mason University's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. She graduated with honors from the University of Alabama at Birmingham with a master's in anthropology of peace and human rights. Much of her work seeks to uncover the hidden narratives of women, specifically Black women, within the fields of anthropology, human rights, justice, and peace, with an understanding of their interconnections to globalization, social movements, and social change. So as you can tell, we have 3 fantastic speakers. I am very lucky to know all of them in different ways, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say with us. Ajinay specifically will also be sharing some of her poetry tonight, so I really hope that you all get a chance to kind of see, again, in practice, just what art can do for social change. So without further ado, I think we can bring Christy on for our first performance and discussion. Hi, Christy.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear my mic. I'm getting used to this headset. How are you?
We're great. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's such an honor to be here tonight. And thank you, Audrey, for the wonderful words. I am so deeply honored for the introduction. And thank you for the land remembrance and the remembrance of today as an International Day of remembering the transatlantic slavery trade. So thank you very much. If it's all right with everyone, I will go ahead and read our poem for the evening, which is one of my personal favorites. It's by the incomparable Audre Lorde, and it is a litany for survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways, coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking now, a now that can be bred, futures like bread in our children's mouths so that their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant, this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not be certain. It might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Thank you so much, Christy.
Thank you.
What was I want to, the first question I want to ask you is just what was it like reading that out loud, reading it as preparation? What does it do for you as a poem?
As you saw with a couple of lines, I messed them up. But it wasn't because I hadn't read this poem many times. I think it was more as if my own voice, my own body wanted to put my own words in there because I know what that is. I know what that feels like. I know what it is to be this poem, to just trying to survive. And even though, I tell people all the time, I always considered myself a silver spoon kid. The daughter of a diplomat. I had tremendous amount of opportunities and privileges that many in the United States or around the world simply do not have. And yet I am very, very clear about the oppression is very present. I tell the story all the time about the minute it really hit me that we're not protected, that women who look like me, that people who look like me are not protected, was with the murder of Trayvon Martin, and how instrumental that was in understanding that there are systems, there are structures that in many ways I am complicit in that are aimed at my destruction, that do not want me to survive. And when I read this poem as a highly educated, highly privileged, it still resonates. It still resonates with that. We weren't meant to survive. And especially on this day where we are remembering the transatlantic slave trade, literally, we were not meant to live through this. We were not meant to survive this. We were not meant to exist beyond the needs of the society in that moment. And so for me, it feels like, especially Audre Lorde, her words just resonate all the time in every way, and this poem in particular, it really resonates.
I think it's really interesting to see how poetry can reach in ways that very few things can. It's its ability to say so much with so little.
Yes.
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 And be able to open up your heart and your mind in ways that, nothing else really can. And that's, I think, the power of poetry and art. In fact, I come from the Middle East, where poetry is a very important part of our culture. And poetry oftentimes is how revolutions start. They start with the poets because they can reach people in ways that the ordinary people don't really get.
Yes.
And by the time they get it, the revolution has already started. And people have already gotten motivated and energized to be able to make the change they need to see. So I love poetry. I mean, Busboys and Poets, of course, has poetry in its name. And we've been doing poetry for a long time. And I'm proud to say that Washington, D.C. is now one of the top poetry places in the country. In fact, if not the number one poetry venue in the country is Washington, D.C. And it brings poets from all over the world because we have created this culture of poetry here in the city. There are dozens of venues now that do poetry throughout, understanding that in order for us to find this change that we hope to see in the world, we need to start with art and poetry at the very foundation of it. So that's why I'm really thrilled that we started this program with a poem, and by no other than Audre Lorde, of course.
Yeah. And Andy, I want to recognize Busboys and Poets' role in that creating Washington, D.C. as a center for poetry, because I moved back to the Washington, D.C. in 1996. And it took me a few years to discover Busboys and Poetry. But when I wanted to get my poetry fix, Busboys and Poets and their public, their open mic nights were the places to go. And they were just phenomenal opportunities to hear poetry, to be in the room where people are having these discussions. And you're absolutely right. Poetry has a way of speaking to us and creating images in our minds that no other, I think, art form can do. I mean, even in the Audre Lorde poem, where that, almost to the end, that last stanza where she puts a single word, lowercase, remembering. I mean, how powerful is that single word, and how it makes this explosion of images. It caused me to remember family members, the things that they've been through, the struggles that they've been through, the hardships of people who look like me, of the hardships of our Asian and Asian Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, and remembering what they've had to endure now and for hundreds of years in this country. And so for me, Busboys and Poets has just been one of those go-to places when I need to get that moment, that power. So thank you, Andy, for all that you've done in that arena. I am personally deeply grateful to you for that. So thank you.
Christy, you talk about other just the different ways that poetry and art have kind of played such a strong role in your life. Are there other poets, artists, experiences with poetry that you can think of? I mean, how has it shaped you?
I mean, I love, one of my favorite poets, and having had the honor of meeting her twice before her passing, was Dr. Maya Angelou. And I'm not a deep remember of poetry, but I have imprinted on my heart almost the remembrance that I am the hope and the dream of the slave. That one line in I Rise is such a phenomenal, had such a phenomenal impact on me. And I hold on to that as almost like a personal mantra for myself. And she's shown up in other ways. When we graduate from Bennett College, our motto for ourselves is that we are phenomenal women. And when we graduated, we all had to memorize Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. And so her as a poet, her as a woman, has always had a tremendous impact on me. And more recently, Kendrick Lamar. I mean, I'm sorry, but his music is poetry. I think it's evidenced by the fact that he won the Pulitzer Prize for it. I think his work has a way of not only just the deep joy, just the, just the deep joy, just the deep power, just the deep revolution. He just brings it all the way forward. And I love the way he can get people moving, but also just get them to think. And the way he unifies poetry and beat and visual together to make this powerful medium that people all over the world can relate to, I think is wonderful. And I think Andy is also right in that use of poetry, no matter in the world, and how it's the revolutionary spark, whether it's in the Middle East or South Africa or in Indonesia, Japan, poetry everywhere is just the spark. And it's what music is. I think music is poetry. I think so many of the stories we tell are just poetry. Our oral histories are poetry. And so I think it's at the cornerstone of arts. And I just don't think it gets enough, recognition. But yeah, Kendrick Lamar, Maya Angelou, Childish Gambino, gosh, there's so many. Even, well,
we have to bring
we could go on.
We have to bring in the room Tupac Shakur, of course.
Yes, yes. Even listening, I was watching the documentary about Biggie the other day, and his poetry. I mean, hip hop is poetry to beat. Really, it is.
Absolutely.
You're talking. I mean, and then you're talking about people like the Nuyorican poets, and I mean, that was revolutionary stuff. And the way they put it to hip hop, it was just, as you can see, I'm an old hip hop head.
Yeah.
So I just feel like, poetry changes the world.
Well, I remember having Dennis Brutus come to Busboys and Poets, from the South African poet, of course, who was jailed for many, many years for his writing and his activism. And really to hear the power of poetry and how it transformed South Africa and was part of the revolution to end apartheid was really remarkable to hear his voice as well. Yeah, it's really quite remarkable.
It is. It's such a powerful medium, and I don't think we focus on it nearly enough. I think, but what I do find joy is those artists who are clear about, like Kendrick Lamar, who are doing music or who are doing creative activities and reminding people about the power of poetry and reminding people of the history of poetry and certainly in this country, but also around the world. So.
Well said.
Thank you.
In terms of, the theme for our Peace Week has been anti-racism. This is a buzzword, right? A lot of people, want to be anti-racist, try to be anti-racist, maybe, and a lot of people, I would count myself among them, need to always be doing the work of really fully understanding what that means. And so I don't necessarily want to bring the big question of what is anti-racism, but necessarily, what role do you think art, poetry, in this moment could particularly play, or what role have you been observing it playing for you?
Especially since the murder of George Floyd, there has, to me, been a resurgence of street poetry, of street dance, of street music, of really taking the revolution, taking anti-Blackness down in the streets, demanding change from the streets, even as we are working to end and eradicate hate against Asians and Asian Americans, eradicate hate against trans people, hate against queer people. The place that you're seeing that is through these arts, these street arts, whether it's the murals of George Floyd, whether it's dancing in the streets, during a protest, whether it's corner poetry. I think arts is at the is the tip of the spear, frankly, for anti-racist, anti-dehumanizing, ending the dehumanizing of others in those movements. And I think it always has been. I mean, the March on Washington, you had Mahalia Jackson singing. That wasn't just a random, that was for a purpose. To have her sing, to have her bring the voices out in song was done for a reason. If you look at the Black Panther movement and the arts that they produce and the poetry that they produce, that was for a reason, because that's what people respond to. If you look at artists like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, and when you put that, what is it, Peter, Paul, and Mary, when you put those ideas into song, into poetry, into dance, I think it gets to people on a whole new level. I think it bypasses the intellect. It bypasses the, let's have a conversation. Yeah. And it hits right at the soul. It hits at the spirit level.
Yeah.
And when you can get people at the spirit level, that's when things really start to change.
Well, hearts and minds have never been changed by a PowerPoint presentation.
Right. Or a policy memo, or a resolution in Congress. Right.
Exactly. I've always felt that in order for us to really create the social change that we hope to see in the world, you need to infuse art and culture into it. And that's why even when I created my place at Busboys and Poets, the idea of art and culture was like at the forefront. Yes. That's at the head of everything else. You cannot have a conversation about any issue and hope to change somebody's heart or mind unless you infuse art and culture in the mix.
And the reality is art is the ultimate form, I think, of equality in many ways.
Of humanity.
Right, because you can't stop a song. You open the window, everybody's going to hear it, from the poorest to the most wealthiest. You're not going to stop a song, and you're not going to stop a dance. You can't stop a poem. And when you infuse, and I think radical progressive thinkers know this. I think the revolution, when they, the poet, poem, the revolution, the song, poem, song, hip hop, the revolution will not be televised. I think that's what he's getting at. It's going to be out in the streets. Yep. It's going to be people on drums. It's going to be women and men dancing. It's going to be the resurgence of traditional arts. Like, one of the things that brings me so much joy lately, and on Instagram, which I'm a bit of an addict, is seeing how many Native and Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples are bringing their arts to social media. And when you can watch them do traditional dances, wearing their traditional clothing, and reclaiming their lands, their songs, which were illegal for them to do almost up until maybe 20 years ago. They could literally not practice, these dances. And the fact that they're out here reclaiming their history through dance it's just, and I think, when we hear people talk about, certain songs being inappropriate, or, that's a new debate. And we can all talk about taste. That's subjective. But the reality is that you have people out there, as Maxine Waters so clearly said, reclaiming their time through their art and saying, you will not silence me. You will not shut me up. You will not close me off, whether it's makeup, whether it's clothing, whether it's song, whether it's dance, whether it's poetry. I think the arts is centered. And what worries me is that our young people are losing that. Music is being taken out of the schools. Art is being taken out of the schools. Creative writing is being taken out of the schools. Humanities are being looked down upon at universities. And I think we're doing each other such a disservice when we do that. I really, truly do.
Yeah.
Christy, this is so powerful, and I think we have no, it really is. I have chills. I can't help it. I'm taking notes. We have a lot of people in the chat. Some of whom that are in our community, and some of whom we hope to be in our community, or hope to be in theirs rather. But we have a lot of wonderful comments going on in the chat. Art and poetry moves us away from intellectualizing. Repeating that kind of what people are hearing from you, art is creative motion that is starving to be heard. I want to, we're going to go ahead and we've got our Busboys and Poets team kind of pulling some of those out. We're going to go ahead and I think bring Sabra on board, and want to thank Christy for all of what she shared with us. We're going to go back to Christy in the Q&A later on, but I want to go ahead and introduce Sabra so we can do a conversation with her. Hello, Sabra.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. And
I was so fascinated with that. I was like, she said it all. I can just sit and listen.
That's one of the great things about hopefully these events is that we get to kind of just, even if we can't be physically with each other, that's the beauty of maybe as a world we're becoming a little bit better at understanding the real power of making sure that such conversations are accessible. I want to actually, we've been talking, but I want you to kind of introduce us a little bit to your, you are an actor. You have a long and celebrated commitment to art, but you have taken that and you've tied that intrinsically with activism as well. It's a big question, but can you tell us a little bit about what that journey has been like?
Yeah, so I would say that I have not been as strategic as you make it sound like I am. I view being an artist as being an activist. The arts are activism and have always been activism, as you've alluded to. I really loved what you said, Andy, about poetry being the spark. There can be no, that revolutions start with the poets, because I do think that the privilege of being an artist, comes with this noblesse oblige idea of to have the privilege of being an artist implies a responsibility to society as well. And I think that what I noticed coming to this country from the UK, from what used to be Europe back in the day, like a year ago, is that, in this country, we really see the arts as entertainment or for artists. And we don't really understand the deep power of the arts to make change, especially for people who are self-described non-artists. And so for me, I didn't understand the power of the arts fully, even being an artist. And so, I was raised, my mother is a theatre director, my stepdad is a playwright. So I was raised being taken to protests and, social justice events and using the arts in those events. So it was somewhere in my bones. And, when I first came to America, I came as an actor. I got this gift of an exceptional ability green card, and I came here as an actor, and I joined Tim Robbins' theatre company, the Actors Gang, as an actor, and then kind of collided with the reality of mass incarceration in America, which even to this day, sometimes I'm like, I cannot believe that these statistics are real. And I remember just thinking, well, I'm just a little actor, what can I do to even have any kind of impact on that? And then started doing the work at the Actors Gang and just really seeing how it deeply affected my life. And so I went to Tim and was like, I'd like to be involved in whatever prison kind of work you have. And he said, we don't have anything. Can you please invent something? And literally, I had no clue what I was doing. I just Googled prisons in California. Oh, Pelican Bay, that sounds pretty. Not pretty, Supermax prison. And, just really started out on a wing and a prayer, just bringing a workshop, a theater workshop into, actually we started in Chino in California. And then just being smacked upside my head by the impact it had on the guys in the room in just 1-2 hour class, and I think that the key is, it's interesting that you talk about poetry because I use poetry a lot in my work, but it's the process of writing poetry. So my work is very process oriented. We don't make plays. We don't teach people how to be artists. We use the tools that the arts provide to help people, to give it to them really as tools to make different emotional choices or heal trauma or change behavior and change narratives about who they are and what the world is. And so, I have to say I kind of blundered into this, you know, and then just discovered, you know, this diamond of what the potential of what the arts can do in this darkest of places, you know, to create a space of vulnerability and joy, and a place where through playing people are able to dismantle this idea of, let's say, gang affiliation. You know, I'm mandated to attack this person because they're not in my gang or not of the same race as me, and then playing together how in an indirect way that completely changes their point of view, and they become brothers and sisters through the work. So, you know, this is a 15-year journey in this country, and I'm just at the beginning of it. I feel like I'm just really starting to understand the power of the arts to make change and transform culture.
How easy is it for you to get the arts into prisons? Is it a big? Do you have to convince people of it, or is it something that people are already primed for?
Well, I heard my sister Christy say you can't stop a poem, and it's the same with all of the art. So we've actually, people working inside prisons doing art programming have changed the culture of incarceration in the last 15 years or more. And so when we first started, it was impossible. I mean, they were just like, you are out of your minds. You are not bringing that in here. They're all just going to fight each other, and there's no way. And then as we, you know, forced our way in, which is basically what happened, forced our way into prison to do this very seemingly, you know, woolly liberal thing of playing, you know, it became, oh, wow, the level of violence has dropped. You know, there's an 89% drop in in-prison infractions when people do the work. So then the powers that be are like, oh, wait, this is keeping us safer and making our job easier when they're doing this, you know, sissy thing over here that we think is just a bunch of fluff. Oh, their behavior is starting to change. And so now we're in a situation where we fought very hard for a line item in the state budget for transformational arts programming, which we got, and now it's in all 35 prisons. So all prisons have arts programming now, and now it's like the norm, you know, from being like this outlier, it is now the norm. And, you know, I think it's very interesting that the powers that be inside prison, when we started working there, would say to me things like, I don't like this. I don't like what you're doing. It's like, and I was like, why? Why don't you like it? It's making you safer. And they would be like, well, now the guys, they have like an attitude and they have things to say about their situation. And, you know, really that is, you know, that was like the underlying wish that they would get agency and, you know, start to feel fully human again. And, you know, it was recognized by the people who are, you know, overseeing them in a way, even that they saw the change, and it was threatening to them because it's disrupting the system.
Amazing.
That's so powerful. And I think, you know, I was hearing there in your words about kind of how this has played out, you know, I think to your point about arts being entertainment, right? And I mean, right now, I feel like we feel it a lot, right? You know, we're constantly, already we were like this, but now, you know, people are just consuming, right? Television, TikToks, you know, which are art, right? I mean,
I love it. Love TikTok.
Right, I do too. I can't get away from it. But I think that, you know, the other side of that coin, right, that you said is that, you know, there isn't always that appreciation of the radical aspect of art, whether it's that the radical aspect of that process. I mean, you're speaking to that, right? The sense of agency that you can get from art. And I'm wondering if it's a big question, but you know, when we are talking about art for social change, art for social justice, you know, where is it that art actually can have that radical revolutionizing impact instead of you know, because I do get the sense, you know, art can also be used to foment violence, right? Art can also be co-opted by the powers that be to distract, and maybe not distract, but make it seem as if something's happening when perhaps it's not. You know, I mean, I would just be very curious if you have any thoughts on, you know, where is it that you've seen art really making change? What does it mean for art to make a really transformational change rather than kind of that surface level change.
Yeah, I think artists, it's us too. We have a responsibility because we don't often understand the full impact and power of the arts, which is why the arts are not funded in this country on a federal level much. That's why the arts are not in the core of the school day, because us as artists, we also don't understand the full impact. So what happens very often is people think that they're being revolutionary when they're like, oh, we'll have an event and then we're going to include the arts. And include the arts means we'll have a song or we'll have a dance. But what is really the revolutionary part is, what if we change the culture? Because even as artists, as arts organizations, when we discuss the future or create vision or talk about our work, we sit around a table to do it, and we don't use the arts. We just sit and talk around a table. That could be Unilever. That's corporate approach. That is not an artistic approach or a creative approach. So in our work, I always say at Creative Acts, we take the table and we throw it out the window. And we do poetry and drawn art and theatre and dance as a way, in the process, as a way to reimagine. And that's what I'm doing right now. I don't know, should be saying this, but I'm speaking with the DA's office in LA. We have a very progressive DA who's trying to do really radical things and is getting a lot of kickback. So we're trying to infuse his process of how to understand that, how to reimagine through an artistic process. This is the work that you and I are doing, Audrey, with the National Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Commission. We're trying to get a National Truth Commission bill, right? So for me, it's not enough to have people just come and tell their stories in a truth commission and, you know, hope that's going to impact people. In the process, we have to use an artistic, creative process. And it's especially important for people who are in movements and who are creating, you know, who are the revolutionaries. Because if we don't gain the tools to do our own internal work, our own self-reflection, which is what people inside have taught me the arts do, and when you use the arts in the process, we will become the oppressors in the future. Because you can't just push outwards. You can't just push outwards for change. You have to push outwards through looking inwards. And that's what the arts are for. That's why artists lead revolutions.
Oftentimes, I think the arts get a short shrift because there's no real tangible way to measure the impact. I mean, I know you mentioned
my life.
Exactly. I know you mentioned in prison they've seen a reduction in the violence and so on within the prison. That's a measurable issue, I think, that they can do. But most of the time, when we go around, for example, like every year, you know, the budgets that come up, we have to go and testify how it's important to keep the arts. And I'm really sick and tired of having to explain that over and over again, how important the arts are. Not only, I mean, even as an economic engine, the arts are necessary. I mean, people move to cities not because they have high-rise buildings. They move to cities because of the culture, because of the art, because of theater, because of music, because of all the things that these cities bring about. And yet it's very difficult to sell that to a city council or to a mayor. You know, they have to be really enlightened for them to recognize how important it is. And the arts in school, as you mentioned earlier, are oftentimes the first thing that gets cut in the school. And I would argue that they should be the very last thing that gets cut.
That's right.
Cut the math, cut the science.
That's right.
Whatever you have to cut, but keep the arts. And I have to tell you a story for me. I stuttered as a child when I was in middle school. And I remember being very uncomfortable being around kids, especially during lunchtime. It was a very difficult time for someone who doesn't understand the language, who stutters, who has, you know, look different than everybody else. My art teacher saved my life. It was my art teacher that noticed that and brought me into the art room and let me have my lunch there while I painted and I drew, because I knew how to do that. And that really connected me in a whole different way. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today.
Exactly. And I hear that all the time. Like in prison, I hear, if I'd have had this in school, I wouldn't be in prison today. But, you know, this is such an important point that you bring up, Andy, because That is white supremacy. That is a white supremacist structure that wants to measure, you know, right brain activities with left brain measurements, as I always say. This is 15 years of this crap of trying to like, you know, get quantitative measurements of things that are qualitative. And it's an impossible task. And what it is, it's the same thing that we deal with in the rest of society, which is what is considered merit and what is considered experience. Like, I don't have a university degree. I was dancing at 16. I did not go to university, but I teach at UCLA and USC. So it's not just a degree that is merit. It's not just a degree. It's not just numbers that prove something works. So I spent a long time trying to figure out, you know, how do you measure in numbers a massive rise in empathy, which is the number one thing you need not to, you know, reoffend in terms of being in prison, and is, you know, the thing that everyone says that people have to have, but how do you measure that in numbers? You can't do that. You can measure it anecdotally, which is important. But I know that governments and funders, they don't care about that. They want to see numbers. So I had to try to think of another way that they would consider, you know, putting myself in their head, that they would consider legitimate. And the way that I came up with was going to mental health professionals and having them come and do a report on the work at the end of the work. Well, that worked. Those people, because those apparently are legitimate people, artists who may have studied for 10 times as long as a mental health professional. Our opinions are not considered important, but a mental health professional report, that will do it. So
we'll take what we can.
Yeah, and so it's that. And so this is why I went from, you know, being an artist doing the work to being an activist and being an advocate, an arts advocate, because I realized, oh, we can't just do the work inside. We have to change legislation. We have to change, you know, definitions. For instance, you know, recidivism is a word everyone likes to talk about, actually does not mean anything, or does not mean what you think it means. And it's the same with this quantitative measurement of things. We worked with the Department of Justice when Eric Holder was AG. He asked us to come and talk to him about creative ways to make justice reform, and with the Obama White House. And as part of that, I would say, okay, how can you change the measurements? Because that is a white supremacist approach to measuring. For instance, we talked a lot about indigenous peoples. They view the arts as medicine and artists as shamans. So, you know, it's priorities and change in narrative, as we said.
Well, talking about measurement, I mean, I do hope some of our Carter School colleagues are on the call. We do have conversations like this from time to time, but we can always do more of them. You know, we're deep into those conversations about measurement.
That's where it starts, because you're the people who are graduating university who are going to be the people making policy. So That's where it starts.
Right, and it's such a good reminder too that, you know, that is you know, and that's a whole other conversation, but a privilege to have those, right? Whether it's BA, BS, MS, MA, PhD, you know, behind your name that has
all those letters.
Right, right. Well, I want to thank you so much for what you've shared with us. You know, we're going to return, you know, in the audience Q&A, but I do want to get Ajinay in here. But thank you so much for joining us. Sabra.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be in this great company. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to go ahead and, again, we'll be having Sabra and Christy rejoin us, but I want to welcome Ajinay Roundtree, my colleague, my friend, to share some of the poetry with us. Yeah, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, hi, Andy.
Hello, Ajinay. It's so good to be with you on virtually. I can't wait till we can be together, not virtually, you know? Like in person. You know?
In person. Yeah, soon.
We human beings were not meant to be virtual. We were meant to be more closer together. Yep.
Truth. That is very true. Yeah. Very true. Very true.
Right. Ajinay, do you want me to go ahead and you have some poetry to share with us? Do you want me to go ahead and kind of get that up on the screen for us here?
Yes, please, Audrey. I'll just introduce it. So I am Ajinay Roundtree. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. And I'm sharing some of my poetry. I haven't, I do write poetry. because I am both a left brain and a right brain person. So I do write poetry, but it often goes unshared. So this is very exciting for me to share this. And the title of this section of poetry that I'm sharing with you is from Audre Lorde's essay called "Poetry is Not a Luxury," when she's talking about the need for women, but especially Black women, to use poetry to express themselves. And at the end of this essay, she writes essentially what we've been talking about here. And she says, "The white fathers told us, 'I think, therefore I am.' The Black mother within each of us, the poet, whispers in our dreams, 'I feel, therefore I can be free.' Poetry coins the language to express and charter the revolutionary demand, the implementation of that freedom." So these poems that I'm sharing with you today, let me just pull it up 1 second. I'm gonna get it here for you. Sorry. These poems that I'm sharing with you today are my way of finding my freedom, giving freedom to those things that are deep inside, and hopefully sparking conversation after this. So Audrey, are you ready, or you want me to go?
Computer restarted.
Sure. Okay, I got you. I got you. No worries.
Yes. Tech issues. I'm so sorry.
No problem at all. It's fine. This is what happens. Welcome to the virtual world, everybody. I know we all have experienced this a number of times. So hold on 1 minute. I will get this here for you all.
And again, for any of you who might have joined after our introduction, Ajinay's poetry has appeared in Freedom's Plow as well. So Ajinay, we can see your poetry.
Great.
So.
Okay. So, as I said, this is called The Implementation of Freedom, and this is poetry by Ajinay Roundtree. This poem is called Meg and Me, lodged obstruction, held in place by will and time, tenured racism. Crabs in a barrel, crying, "What about me?" while atop shoulders of Black women. History dimmed, an elevated Black woman, not progress enough. Tall poppy syndrome, roots in connecting sidewalk cracks, race and sex, the snip. These last three poems that I just shared were about the election or the selection of Kamala Harris to be Joe Biden's running mate, and the pushback that I heard from men and frankly from other women just in that decision. This next poem is called Announcement. It came out of a space that was about frustration, about the tendency for people to rely on others to do their work, to be a bridge to knowledge for them. And so I wrote this as a response or as a continuation of the bridge poem from 1981. And so it's called An Announcement. Closed for repairs. My back no longer supports perused dead weight. What you meant? Sometimes we hear people say, well, that's not what I meant, particularly when we're talking about anti-racism or, well, I didn't mean that to be racist, but what did you actually mean? So here's a poem that I wrote. Black Lives Matter, you say to us and yourselves. Show your evidence, we demand. Here's my protest photo or my retweet. But where are the books on your shelves, on your syllabi, in your classroom, at your kitchen table, in your friend group, in your peacekeeping? We question. It's more nuanced than that, is what you meant. The genocide heirs. Life and death are in the power of the tongue is a pen for pro-life genocide heirs. Vote to assassinate character and stand by as hands kill the body. Then sometimes I have these sparks of joy where I'm thinking about love and romance, because sometimes you just need a break. So this is what I wrote about in Fonder. In orbit, I observe. There my heart accrues fearlessness and develops more certainty to dwell in your presence. And then Dreamcatcher. Where are you, my love? Dreamcatcher. Shoot your shot soon. Your bedside is cold. So I appreciate the opportunity to share these insights into my soul with you all. And yeah, I'd love to hear any comments or questions that you might have about them. And yes, so thanks so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Ajinay. You know, I have been very lucky to be able to read some of your poetry before and to kind of really sit with it, and then to just, you know, experience the poetry of being, you know, not as much in your physical presence as I would like to be, you know, just because of the pandemic, but, you know, virtual presence, certainly. And, you know, one thing that I have really appreciated when, you know, just knowing you and then in what you presented here is there are so many different levels of the art that you're presenting, right? You've got the poetry, you've got the way that you engage with your poetry, and then you've got the visual aspect, which you very thoughtfully brought to it. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what's going through your mind. How are you approaching that process of when you are bringing your whole self to that in so many different forms, really? Right.
So one thing that I think we often don't talk about as artists who are also scientists, particularly when we live in the space that is peace and conflict resolution. I'm an introvert by nature. So the process of observation and watching people and then placing things together it takes me to a different level. So when I'm trying to put together this slideshow, for instance, I can only tell you about my experience and how I view the world, right? So I navigate the world as a Black woman. And so putting together slides about me it only felt natural to include only photos of Black women, because that's how I see myself. Therein lies my reflection, right? And beyond that, Black women as human beings have systematically been at the bottom of every social hierarchy, have been dehumanized, continually be degraded, continually to be pushed aside, cast down, undervalued, and stood upon at the same time. So in this opportunity to present our full self, my full self, I needed to take advantage of photographs that were displaying women who look like me as the center of the lens, right? So that you could see all of us. And that was hugely important to me. And I think that's a part of art as well, right? When we often, there's a tendency sometimes to see photographs as just things we hang on a wall or just hang in in a museum, but photographers have to have a lens as well, have to have an eye that maybe that I don't have to have as a poet, right? They have to have an ability to see the world differently than I do as a poet. But as an artist, I also have to be able to appreciate what they are bringing to the table and to the art form itself, right? When we're thinking about protests and protest symbols, that's graphic design. A lot of the time, it's not necessarily or not always a poem. It's a graphic, and we need to take into account the power that photography has and the selection of photos when we're doing PowerPoint presentations or when we're giving sharing a story or whatever, because that also speaks volumes to what we're trying to convey.
Right.
How do you choose that art form? Is poetry something that comes naturally to you? Is that what you feel like is the best way for you to express yourself? How did you come up to poetry as your way to express yourself?
Yeah, bless. So my mom, when I was a kid, because I was quite bashful, put me in all of these summer after school programs to push me outside of my comfort zone. So creative writing and unlimited potential. I remember being in that class during the summer, unlimited potential class, and they were asking us to write, and I hadn't ever tapped into that part of my brain because I didn't know that a kid could write poetry. And so as I started doing it, I was a little bit embarrassed. So I just hid that away. And then I went to college and I started writing music and playing music. And I thought, yes, I'm going to be a songwriter and all this stuff. And then I realized I don't really like being on stage. So let's wind that back a little bit. And so just writing and having poetry has just allowed me to continue to find my voice, that part of me that wants to come out, that at sometimes may have anxiety about stepping forward, and then just that part of me that needs to have process, that needs to mull things over, because sometimes you can't tell everybody what you're thinking. And so you need to get it out, otherwise it's going to make you crazy. And so I think that's part of it. I needed a space for myself to be able to tell myself what you think and how you feel is okay about this situation or about these things, and being able to sit with that and knowing that they're my feelings, I can get them out, and that doesn't make me a bad person for having these feelings or wanting to be revolutionary, right? Because I think as a kid or as a young woman, as a person growing up in a white supremacist patriarchal society, the tendency is for us to shrink back. And I've lived a lifetime of shrinking back. And so now I'm like, bring on the revolution. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that's the space in which I live.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of a story. This is a little bit of a tangential thing, but Langston Hughes, when he was in high school, the way he became a poet, he writes about it, the way he became a poet, because he wasn't born to be a poet. He didn't think that. And he said in high school, they were electing all the different officers for different functions. So they had the class president, they had the secretary, they had the treasurer, they had the parliamentarian, they had like the doorkeeper, they had everybody else. And they also had something called the class poet. And because he was one of the few Black students, everybody turned to him and assumed he's going to be the poet. So they said, you become the poet. And he said, okay. And that's how he became a poet.
Wow.
From that day on. It was just completely by accident, discovering that he had this talent along the way.
Yeah, I think that I feel that, because I didn't set out to be, I didn't set out to be this person. Do you know what I mean? Like I know that there's an aspect, a huge aspect of it that is God-given, right? But there's also a huge aspect of it that is cultivated, and that I have to continue to grow, and I have to continue to push. And so I think when we're talking about the arts, and we're talking about language and music and photography and drawing and theater, we have to be able to put children and adults in spaces where they can feel themselves challenged by the space that is pushing them to make art, right? And I think it's within all of us. It's just a matter of, do we want to push ourselves to that space that is uncomfortable, and where you feel vulnerable, right? Because art is about vulnerability. It's about putting your words and your thoughts and your ideas on paper and presenting it to the world and going, this is how awesome I think I am. But I don't know if you might agree. And I need to be okay with you not agreeing, but still finding confidence in the work that I'm producing. And I think it's also a part of, we dismiss art as something that people who may be less educated, or we just pass it off. And I think, as Christy said, it's something that is an equalizer, right? And we need to recognize how important it is for all of us to embrace our ability to be creative. Yeah.
Before I do want us to kind of get a chance to bring everyone back on board for some questions potentially for the audience. So if anyone in the audience, you can use the comment feature to ask some questions, and we'll get them. But before we do that, Ajinay, I wanted to just see if we could hear a little bit more from, you are in this space where you are an academic and you are an artist, right? You are both. In what ways are those intertwined for you, and what ways is there a tension there for you? If there isn't, why not? And then, you're an anthropologist, you're in peace and conflict resolution, you are dealing daily because of because of your lived experience, and because you are taking these questions on with a determination that is informed by your academic work and your artistry. How does that all kind of mix together to really inform the steps that you take in this space?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Audrey. But it's hard. Let's put it like that. It's hard because as you alluded to before, there are levels, right? There are levels that as an academic who is a scientist by discipline, as an anthropologist, I have that discipline that is very much soft when you're comparing it to physics or biology in that regard. But there's the creative element that comes in when we're talking about literature, when we're talking about how does an anthropologist study culture through the writings that are excluded from the from the canon, right? This is part of the conversation that I'm having right now, or have had at the university level, right? When we're talking about social change and we're talking about the construction of narrative and the creation of canon, who decides what is included and what is excluded? And not just when we're founding or creating a discipline or a field, but as that continues on, as fields grow and as time passes, who says and why do we continue to say, oh, well, this is this box that this field lives in. And so because this field lives in this box, we cannot allow anything like poetry or Black women writers and artists to enter into that space because, well, we've never had that before. Well, that doesn't sit well with me. And so that's part of where I'm living right now. And so as a person who lives on the tension that is Black and woman and anthropologist and artist and revolutionary and social change agent and person who knows about women who have sat in this space, it is a decision that I have to navigate. And sometimes it's exhausting. And sometimes I have to walk away and write poetry about love and romance because listen, I think there's a tendency to think or to continue to allow us to place academics or artists and see them as monoliths who don't have weaving or lives that ebb and flow, and that does us all a disservice. And I'm also of the opinion that if more scientists relaxed a little bit and tapped into their creativity, wow, what kind of change could we actually have in a department that may be stifled, right? I mean, and I'm not talking about like, oh, we have to all sit down and participate in Sabra's workshop. I'm talking about maybe I should get a plant that is yellow in this all brown room. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
like,
right.
This is what, so tapping into that, I think we need to start exploring that. Instead of wearing all Black today, maybe I'll put on a shirt that has stripes. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you need to just step it up slowly, but understand that creativity is everywhere. It's even in how you design your house, right?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
We're all very aware of that potentially right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And I will say, Andy, you said, PowerPoints are not going to reach hearts and minds. And I think that's mostly true. But your PowerPoint, Ajinay, was probably the best PowerPoint in a long time.
Yeah. Well, as long as you infuse poetry in it, then that sort of takes away what I said,
It's true. It becomes art there. It's no longer PowerPoint. It is poetry. We're going to bring in Christy and Sabra so we can do kind of, we have about 15 minutes left. We have a question in the comments, and again, if you are tuning in, you can use that comments feature to put your questions in there, and we can have a broader conversation as well. And I think we're getting some questions from Candace. Your voice, Ajinay, your voice is heard through your poetry. Do you have a specific audience that you attempt to reach? And I think it got cut off there. So if Candace, you want to continue, we can do the second half. There's another question from Liam about, as an academic, Ajinay, how much influence do your studies have on your poetry? And do you intentionally combine or separate those two spheres of your life? Christy, you are also deep in academics all the time as well. And then, and I think this gets to, again, how do we compartment, for all three of you, the compartmentalization of being an artist versus being something else, right? How do you manage that? Are there times when you compartmentalize too? Would it make sense to do so? So those are two questions that we have out there that maybe can get us going.
I'd like to think that I compartmentalize, but to be honest, I have a notebook underneath my bed in case I wake up in the middle of the night and I need to write something down. So, and that's poem, or that's an idea I may have for a paper. So, so to answer your question, Liam, it does merge, and it merges, and it in as much as I may try to intentionally separate things, the more I read, the more I come across Black women's poetry, or the more I begin to understand myself as a race woman, as an academic in a space that is predominantly white, that continues to deny the knowledge production of people who look like me or people who may be in the global South. I find myself pushed up against that, where I can no longer separate those two things, in as much as I'd like to try.
I think that it's interesting because when you first asked the question, Audrey, my first response was, oh no, I keep those things. First it was, I don't consider myself an artist. Second is, oh no, I keep those things completely separate. And then a thought reminded me, oh no, but in your comp exam, you put hip hop lyrics and poetry. And then I'm like, oh, that's right, I did. And so I think Ajinay hit the nail on the head. For those of us who live as for those of us who have been, I don't live as a marginalized person, I live as a full person, thank you very much. But for those of us who live in a society that tries to marginalize us and make us small, whether it's here in the United States or anywhere in the globe, I think arts is one of the things that gives us our voices back, and not including our arts in our academic or in Andy's case, our living, making our living, it's cutting a part of ourselves off. It's moving away from our spiritual center. And so I think, especially in the world where academia can do so much just by the nature of the beast to strip you away from that spirit, I think reaching out and going back and grabbing it and claiming it and saying, I'm making space for this, is critically important. And I think, and I've told many, many students who have come to me and, asked me about the sort of the doctoral process. And I've said, you have to hold on to that, whether it's personal, whether it's, nothing that anybody ever sees, but it's something like Ajinay, you keep a notebook under your bed. You have to hold on to that side of you, to that thing that brings you joy, that thing that lets you express yourself. Because if you don't, you'll lose yourself in the ivory tower and won't find your way back out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I kind of have the opposite issue of that I'm not an academic, and I speak at a lot of universities. And also, when I was the first place I was asked to teach was at UCLA. And, I was like, oh, maybe they don't realize, maybe they don't know, because I've been on many panels where people, I honestly remember being on a panel where there was like 6 of us on the panel, and they were like, so obviously everyone here has been to an Ivy League university and they've had that. And I was just like, oh dear, I don't know why I'm here. So when I first got asked to teach at UCLA, I was really in a panic, because I was like, oh no, the whole process in the academia and the bureaucracy, and how am I going to mark things? And, and so what I did was just had to really key into being an artist and to being in places, I'm always out of my depth. I never have a safety net. I didn't know how to work in prison, but the people in prison taught me how to be there. So I was like, maybe the students will teach me how to be in academia, which is what happened. And, just recently when I was asked in the fall to teach at USC, having taught at UCLA, I was like, oh, okay, so here's the deal. This might be nothing, you have to give me the space to really be in a laboratory. And because I know as an artist in academia, you know, that I have to make the space be what I want it to be, because I know that that will be good for the students. And we did, you know, they were like, oh, they're all designers in the School of Dramatic Arts. They've never done any performing before. So, you know, be careful about making them perform, whatever. And I was like, oh no, they're going to be performing. So we did like this process where, you know, we were doing about voter suppression, but we did an artistic process. And as we got it on the process, they started freaking out because they were like, what about the outcome? Like, what are we going to do? Well, you know, how are you going to market? What are we going to end up with? And I was like, I don't know, maybe nothing. And we have to be in that space because that's a creative space. And out of it, they created this online 3D voter suppression maze and an 8-foot mailbox with burning ballots in it that we took around all of the polling stations, which they would never have done if we just sat there at the beginning and was like, here's the curriculum, here's what you do. So I do think that, you know, there is a space in academia for this kind of approach, but you have to wrestle it to the ground to do it, you know.
Yeah. you know, it's really funny. I have businesses, so a lot of people refer to me as a business person or businessman, but I on my business cards I have artist, and it's because to me, and I don't just put it there because I want to be funny about it, but because I believe art really informs everything that I do. So I start with art. I don't start with business. My business is around art. My life is around art. My living is around art. Who I am is around art. How I dress is around art. All of that is really about being an artist first and foremost, and the rest of the stuff just falls in place.
And I think people start. If you look at children playing, I think we start out that way. We all are born artists. Right. We sing to ourselves. We hum to ourselves. We have imaginary friends. We dance all the time. We're drawing all the time. And I think it's beautiful that Sabra said the students will teach you how to be in academia. And I think that needs to happen younger, because what happens by the time you're a certain age, you're taught that everything else is important, that your imagination, right? That the things that you do to earn a living are what's important. And you lose that being, you lose that artistic expression. And I think it takes years to go back to the beginning, to what you were at the beginning, which was an artist. From the beginning.
This is so important. I remember working with the city in the mayor's office of reentry, and they have like monthly meetings, and they were like, can you run one of the meetings? I was like, okay, crazy. Okay, sure. And, you know, we did, at the end of it, we did this poetry writing exercise, and there was this older guy, there was loads of people around this big table, and there was this older guy there, I guess in his 60s or 70s maybe. And he was like in a little suit, this little old white guy. And, you know, he wrote a poem. And afterwards, I invited people to share. And he said he wanted to share. And when he was sharing, he was crying as he was reading his poem. Because he said, I'm a paper pusher. I'm a bureaucrat. I've never written a poem in my life. But he said, you know, this process showed me that, oh, I'm a creative human being too. You know, I can write a poem too. And his poem is beautiful. And just like that kind of thing, like you're saying, Christy, like we forget who we are. And the arts, that is one of the most important reasons to have the arts in the core of the school day, and to have government funded arts, you know, federally funded arts, because the arts remind us who we are and who we've always been.
Yeah. So Audrey, I wanted to ask you and see if maybe, because this is Peace Week that we're talking about here, I would love to hear from our panelists, how do they feel is the role of the arts in creating peace? So maybe something that big, unless you have other questions you want to ask from the audience, but I would love to hear, at least from all of you. I know you've touched on some elements of that, but I'd love to see how you see the arts can create a more peaceful world.
Excuse the weird facial expression, because even as you started asking it, Andy, I was like, but it's fundamental. I wanted to be like,
duh.
It's like, it is peace. Like, like, duh. And I apologize, but you know, frankly, I think it like I said, it's fundamental. You can't have a an anti-dehumanization, an anti-racist, a pro-peace, a pro-liberation, a pro-empowerment movement without the arts. It's not possible. Even if you go to a protest, the signs are artistic. I mean, come on. Some of the signs that we see at these protests are so fantastic. I think peace, I think the arts, like you even talked about in South Africa, I think the arts awaken peace. I think without the arts, people don't know what peace is. Like it needs the arts. We need the arts to tell us, to show us. And I think it was either Ajinay or Sabra talked about the reimagining, what is possible. I've been reading a lot of Octavia Butler lately, and the reaching out to what is possible, Afrofuturism, and touching the possibilities, N.K. Jemisin, and just including Black folk in a sci-fi future, but it arts is what shows us that peace is possible, that a future is possible, that moving forward is possible, that anti-racism is possible, that being, pro-woman is possible, being pro-children is possible. I think it starts with the arts. I think it's as fundamental as air, frankly. I really do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the arts also I think we don't ask why enough, in our culture. And I think that the art, like your question, Andy, is a very fundamental, beautiful question. What is peace? That's where, for me, because you have to have truth before you have transformation. We have to know what we're talking about when we say peace. And for me, peace is very robust. It's an active peace. I think often we think of it being all like, la, 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 I'm just going to be like peace being somehow like niceness. That is not peace. I feel like peace is like very robust and active. And, the thing with the arts, or, having the arts in the process, is that the arts make us question, but question with vision. So the arts help us to develop vision. And, really, I spend a lot of time. Yeah, exactly. I see that peace is radical. I spend a lot of time. I'm a Buddhist. I chant, and, chanting to expand my vision, to have a 300-year vision, to be able to live in a way that will affect people that, I'll be less than dust in 300 years. Nobody will know my name. I'll be less than dust. But what cause can I make to have an effect in 300 years where that effect is what I would call peace, which is value creation? How can we create value in our lives? And that's what the arts teach us, because the arts are not linear. The arts are cyclical, and the reality of life and time is cyclical. So the arts connect us to actual reality, not what we think is reality, and give us the tools to do the inner work. And I keep saying that, but that's what I think is meant when people say do the work. So to have peace, I have to have peace in here. I have to have this active peace inside of me, which means I have to be accountable and take responsibility for myself so that I can develop this big vision and live within it, live actively creating value.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I would simply say or add that for me, peace has to come through justice. Mm-hmm. And so what does justice look like? For the urban designer, urban planner, justice, or the application of peace through justice, may look like ensuring that curb cuts exist, right. Ensuring that that there is a walkway for people for wheelchair users, right? That's peace through justice. Peace through justice may look like a memorial for those survivors and victims of Holocaust or genocide, or peace parks. But peace may also look like having a biophilic design that embraces nature in a space that is closed off, that allows for life to grow in a space that may look dead, right? It's also ensuring that you are tapping into color and creativity and allowing your space, your brain to be free from the burdens that come through life. But at the core of it, it's embracing knowledge production. And so allowing someone else's knowledge to speak into your life to help you move towards opening the way, opening a path towards justice for someone else. Hopefully that makes sense.
Really powerful. We are right now just a minute over. There were a few other questions in the comment section. And I apologize to those who we might not be able to get to. If y'all have just maybe even just a few more minutes, Chiniere in the comments asked a very interesting question, but I think I was starting to hear a little bit in your remarks, Sabra, but in all of the remarks, and I feel like it might be a really nice way to just close out what has been truly, a heartfelt evening. And she says, the expression of art, poetry, photography, music as activism can be seen as a spiritual practice. What are the ways that you cultivate your gift of artistry for the revolution? And, maybe we can all sit with this too, and like, what are you going to take forward from this too, in this sense of how it's a full body, full soul experience?
I think for me, I'll just say I have to remain in proximity with the source. So when I'm in proximity with my partner's inside, I'm creative, and it's a never-ending font of creativity because it's a constant give and take. They make a proposal, I take their proposal and add to it. I make a proposal, they take it and add to it. And I feel like In Prison Out of Anywhere is my most creative, joyful place, as weird as that sounds, because we're beyond personality. We're beyond, do I like you or not like you? We're beyond day-to-day stuff. We're in a place where it's just humans meeting. And out of that, I just find that it's training, life training for me. It's reminds me and teaches me about the power of the arts, and also that any human being has the potential to change. Anybody, no matter where you are or what you've done in the past, we always can go from this day onwards, and I'm always in revolution because it's not just an outward revolution. I'm experiencing a human revolution.
That's fantastic. I don't know how to add on to what Sabra said, because I am just awash with wisdom right now. That last sentence about I am always in revolution. I mean, that's just power. That's power. And I love it. And frankly, I want to leave that right there. Because that's I am always in revolution. That's fantastic. I don't know what to even add to that. That's beautiful.
Maybe we
Thank
can
you.
write a poem. We can write a poem.
Really. That's beauty right there. That's I am always in revolution. That's beautiful. Thank you, Sabra, for that. That's thank you. Wow.
Ajinay.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just like, maybe I could write a poem. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But I think to answer Chiniere's question, and even to go back to, I think it was Candace's question, I think for me, it's just staying with the people that I know, right? Or learning from the people who have done it before. Maybe the women, the men who have been discarded, or whose knowledge production only lives in African American literature or African American poetry. Okay, well, how can I cite Black women, right? How can I do that? How can I bring those words into this space in which I live? And that to me is one way that I also cultivate revolution, but also come up against, I think that was Candace's question, how I also overcome the challenges, right? If it's not there, well, I'm going to do my best to bring it in. And so I think that's how, going back to what Sabra said, I sit and stay and am constantly becoming the revolution. So beautiful. Oh, that was beautiful. That was really beautiful. I'm writing that down.
This has been, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. Andy, it's been a pleasure to be able to help cultivate this conversation. Andy, do you have anything you want, kind of?
Well, I am just, I'm full. My heart is full. I have to tell you, my eyes are wider. My heart is fuller. My spirit is soaring right now. To be with such 4 powerful women on an afternoon like this I cannot think of a better way to spend an hour and a half. I really can't. And I really so appreciate all the wisdom, and I'm awash in wisdom, and I'm in constant revolution with all of you. Thank you.
I'm so grateful for these amazing people. Thank you.
Thank you. This has
Thank
been
you
amazing.
so much, guys.
Thank you so much.
It was wonderful.
And thank you, Andy, for the opportunity. And thank you always, Audrey, for your amazingness, because that's all I can call it. You are phenomenal, fantastic.
Yes.
I know that, you really helped put this together. So thank you, as always, my friend.
And Angie, I'll see you at your place as soon as we're allowed to.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you. We'll have to have you come and do readings there.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
That'd be awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody, bye-bye.